Today I'm going to be talking about how game mechanics impact play. Now, this was requested by one of my subscribers, Kicks MMA, and anyone else that has any topics that they'd like to hear me talk about and get my opinions on. Please feel free to make comments below, and I'll try to get to that, or you can send me an email. Now, one of the most noticeable ways that the engine of your game or the mechanics of the game are going to affect the way that you play is in the pacing of the game. Now, this is really noticeable often in combat. This is one of the major differences between different game systems, the way that they adjudicate and handle combat. Now, I'm going to break it down into two basic types here: your battle map games and your non-battle map games. Now, there's a lot of games that don't require battle maps that have some amount of rules for using them. Now, there's games like Mutants and Masterminds and Savage Worlds that don't need battle maps, but they have information in there about movement and such that you don't really need to use a battle map at all in those sort of games. Battle maps are really important, however, in a game like 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, and from what I've heard of Fourth and the one time I played it, it seemed like it was very important there as well. And there's other game examples I can use for games that need battle maps, but I'm going to talk about 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons for a minute and how the battle map is very important there. Well, you have flanking, sneak attacking, reach, you have firing into melee, you have rough terrain and various movement types you're going to make with your charging and so forth, area effects for spells. There's a lot of reasons that battle maps are very effective and important in a 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons game. And if you're fighting more than one opponent, it can be very difficult to adjudicate that combat in any level that's fair to the classes that are really dependent on range, area effect, flanking for sneak attacks, those sort of things. If you have anything more than one or maybe two opponents. Every once in a while in my 3.5 D&D game, I'll opt to not use the battle map. But when it's a combat that is going to have a lot of mechanic implications in there, I opt to go ahead and pull it out. Now, the reason some people don't like battle maps is because they take the game and put it here in front of you instead of here in your mind's eye. Now, that can be a bad thing, as it helps, in some ways, is rather disruptive to the train of thought and to the exercise of imagination that we're indulging here in playing this fantasy game. It can help to break the suspension of disbelief. And of course, the rolling of dice in any sort of combat also helps take you out of that. You're sitting around and rolling dice now instead of thinking about swinging your sword or firing your gun or what have you. Now, with the battle map, you have a great simulation of strategy. Strategy can be very important and very helpful in giving you that immersive feel of really being there, dealing with the enemies, and simulating what real combat would be like. Now, granted, any game, it's going to be limited to the effectiveness that you can get with that. And any rule system is not going to simulate perfectly or even necessarily that well how combat actually is. However, when you give you a large number of rules for using higher ground and for charging and for fighting recklessly or what have you, those rules are going to allow you to have a greater degree of simulation for that combat, which makes the combat in some ways more realistic. However, it also makes it less visceral. Now, in the games where you're not using the combat maps, you have to make sure you are describing more, because the combat map itself, we go back to the old picture's worth 1,000 words. You can see exactly where you are. You can see if there's a dead body in that square. You can see if there's someone you have to fire your gun past. You can see a great number of things that are going to make it more easy for you to understand exactly where you are, exactly what you're doing. The Game Master has to really describe, because you don't want to be in a situation as a Game Master where you're having your players feeling like you're jacking them, because you say, okay, well, no, you're not here, you're over here, because the Game Master has interpreted and understood differently from what the player has. And that can create some disappointment and irritation on both sides. You don't want to drain the energy out there, so you want to make sure you take extra time to describe in detail what you're doing. And when you're not using the battle map, you actually do have that extra time, because you don't have to reach over and move miniatures around You don't have to have that intrusive table there. You can sit around in the living room and do it. You can bounce ideas around more freely and easily that way. So the lack of a battle map, I think, makes it more easy to keep the idea flowing in your mind, and it's less disruptive. However, the using of dice also is disruptive. So we're going to get to that as far as pacing, dice rolling. The old World of Darkness system is rather intrusive in that way, as you roll a lot of dice a lot of times for combat. There's no real special maneuvers, and there's no real special options in terms of flanking and this sort of thing. You describe in as much detail as you like what you're trying to do, and you roll your dice and you see how close to that ideal you come, or how perfectly you have executed what your desire was. Now, in doing that, you had to roll a whole bunch of 10-siders to hit. Then if they wanted to dodge, they rolled a bunch of 10-siders to dodge you, and then you rolled a bunch of 10-siders for damage. Then you rolled a bunch of 10-siders. They rolled a bunch of 10-siders for soak. So there's possibly 4 different dice pool rolls in there, whereas, say, 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons handles that much more streamlined. You roll a d20, you roll whatever your damage dice are, you're done. That's it. That's 2 rolls as opposed to 4. And it's only usually 2 dice. The damage die could be 2 or more die, depending in the 3.5 D&D setting. So that's another way that the engine of a game, that the mechanics can affect your gameplay. The amount of dice rolling, because when you're rolling dice, you're not playing the game here. You're rolling dice, and you're trying to bring those random elements together. There are also games that have Diceless systems, which allow you to definitely play the game more in your mind, but you really need to know what your character's skills are. Diceless systems like Amber, for example, you really need to know what your characters are capable of doing. And the game master can't run a Diceless game if he can't hold at least 30 or 40 different numbers in his head and process them very quickly. It is not something that I recommend for a new game master. It's not something I recommend if you have a group of players that want to exploit your style as a game master. You have to have mature, advanced players, and you yourself as a game master have to have been around and done this quite a few times before you want to get into Diceless play. I find Diceless play to be extremely enjoyable. We will go game sessions without rolling dice. Sometimes I'll handle and adjudicate combat without using dice, making sure I know what the players and what the monsters can do. Some players really enjoy this style, and it can be a lot of fun. But you, as the game master in a Diceless style, the way that I do it is allow the player to get his shine. Okay, describe what you're going to do. You have to turn a lot of narrative control over to the player, and they'll feed you. Okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. But the game master has to always be there to cut the player off with his NPC, because you don't want the player to overreach and overextend. Let him keep going, and the player's going to have a lot of fun. I greatly enjoy Diceless combat, Diceless games, but you need the right group to do them. Otherwise, they can turn out to be utterly abhorrent. And dice themselves, while they can be problematic and distracting for game engine mechanics, they do add that great sense of awe when you drop that natural 20, or when you roll eight tens in a row in a White Wolf style game. Those exploding 10-siders for a game like that, or for a game like All Flesh Must Be Eaten. That can really make the game pop and be, a lot of great memorable moments come from that scintillating energy of dropping the natural 20 or the large number of 10s. So that's one of the good things about the mechanics there of using dice. Now, also looking at a game like a D20 style game, not just a 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, but overall the D20 style games, what they allow for is very quick advancement, and this creates extraordinarily powerful characters. Kix MMA asked me in particular about running a post-apocalyptic game and having some aliens involved there, and using D20 Modern versus Savage Worlds. D20 Modern, I don't think handles very well for a real-world setting. It is... how do I want to say this? The game kind of makes characters a little bit too close to superheroes than ordinary people. Hit points is a big problem. I don't like hit points outside of a fantasy genre or a superhero genre. They make the characters too powerful, and when the characters have lots of hit points, they realize they can take a hit. Well, if I have 100 hit points and I know a gun does 3d6 damage, why am I going to be afraid if you point a gun at me? However, if you're using Chaosium Call of Cthulhu system, you point a gun at me, and I know you'll probably kill me if you hit me with that shotgun. Not only am I the player, am going to be more concerned. Now, if you're a good player, you can sell. Someone points a gun at you, you have 100 hit points. Well, you don't want to get shot, so you could definitely suspend disbelief to a degree. However, if you're not of that style, you are more of an ordinary person with a system like that, you do not want to be shot. All Flesh Must Be Eaten system also does well handling that. And I don't like a D20 system for horror games. I think it handles fantasy. I think it handles superheroes very well. I do not think it handles horror very well at all. I think the weaker your characters are, the squishier, as some like to say, the better they're going to handle in a horror game, because it is scary when you realize this wonderful character you've crafted can be taken out, like that. Just easily destroyed and have that character ended. It's going to add another level of thought to what you're doing to make sure what you're doing is gonna preserve that character, and you're going to be able to continue on being able to put yourself more thoroughly in those shoes. So for the style of game you were asking me about, those two systems, I would probably recommend the Fast Furious fun and that style play of Savage Worlds as opposed to D20. I think it'll handle the game better. I think you also might want to take a look at the Call of Cthulhu Chaosium engine for this game, or the All Flesh Must Be Eaten engine, or even look at the Mortals aspect for either Old or New World of Darkness. Those all might handle the game well. Now, that's one of the other major differences to how mechanics allow games to work. Whether the player feels his character is superpowered and can thus be, sort of look at damage irrelevantly, and that sort of role-playing mindset, or if he's going to know that character can't and have to really handle it well that way. He'd have to really sell because he knows that it can be extraordinarily dangerous if he doesn't take that into account. Game systems also have a lot of differences out of combat, and the amount of dice you roll, the number of times you're going to need to roll dice in social circumstances. Now, all that can sort of be handled to a side, and you can role play. Now, when you role play that, it shouldn't just be the quality of the person's role playing, but it should be reflective of their stats. If I go in there and role play extraordinarily charismatic, but my character has a below average charisma and no real social skills to back it up, that's actually poor role playing. And I've seen game masters say, well, you role play it, and it's however you role play. But that completely makes it irrelevant to have those stats there. You as a game master have to say, okay, he role played this well, so that's basically your die roll. How well did you role play? And we're going to give you a bonus to your stats that way. But you have to remember, and again, it's all about keeping, you're playing Diceless here, so it's about juggling a lot of numbers. If you cannot juggle a lot of numbers, you should not do anything Diceless. You need to know, if you're in a D20 setting, what their diplomacy is, or bluff, or gather information, or what have you, for handling that. And then you also need to know what their charisma is, and then take into their role playing into account and handle it that way. Now, that's a smooth way of doing it, but you can also revert to dice rolling, and that handles differently from system to system. So that is my that's basically my response to what you've said. I think that D20 Modern handles real world situations rather poorly. I don't like it for that. I think the characters are too powerful. They don't have that real feel to them. And I think that you'll probably be better served with a different engine for your game. I hope that helps your request, and thank you very much for making it.